Okay, so we start up where we left off. So if you didn't see my previous video, I set up this simple grid with some pawns and some terrain. And now we're going to look at how to customize the grid in more detail. So I'll just delete these tiles and the pawns as well, because we're going to start with the hexagonal grid, I think. This is the grid spawner, so we have lots of options here, and I'm going to go through the most important of these in turn. So one of the things you can see is that you can the meshes are set up for all the different things that are displayed in the game. So we have the default grid mesh, which is the one that is displayed here, and you have things like the tiles that are displayed for what tiles you can move to, and you have target markers, stuff like that, and you can easily swap these out. So if we go to meshes, here we have all the meshes included in the toolkit, so I can drag something else in. So here's the default tile. So if I, instead of this kind of tile, I want the default tile to be like this blue wall, that works as well. Now we have a grid of blue walls, or trees or whatever you want, you can make a grid out of, and they don't have to be square, they can be oblong, things like that. Anything works. Now let's try to make a hexagonal grid. So for that we're going to need at least a hexagonal base mesh like this. Now as you can see, it's not a proper hex grid yet, it's a square grid layout with hex grid meshes. So to make this a proper hexagonal grid, we have to look here in the grid spawner, and here you can see hex grid. So if I check hex grid, now it is a proper hex grid. And like I said in the previous video, this works with the custom snap to custom grid here. So if I go to any of my pawns or the hexagonal tiles, I can drag these on and they will snap to the hexagonal grid. And if you turn this off, let's see, so you can turn it off, and then they, let's see, then you can move them as you want without them snapping. Now if I turn grid snapping back on, I can get them to snap again, or you can customize within each tile that that specific tile should ignore the grid snapping. So now it's placed at the position where the actor actually is, because how this is done is that the actor is really here, but the mesh is moved so it snaps to the grid. Now you can click the place actor at anchor to make these two the same. So then when you go to ignore snap to custom grid, it will be at the same place. Now you can move it just as you want again. So that's the grid snapping. We'll look at some other options. So you have a collision plane that you can show or hide, and this is the plane that detects collision, or it records where the player clicks on the grid, so it has all collision information. So the default tile does not need to have collision. So you don't have to have a single collision mesh for every little tile in the world, which is good for performance. Now if you're going to have height maps with different heights for different tiles, then you can't use this plane, of course. Though you can still use it for the lowest level of the level. So you can show this, so you can turn it off, and you can choose the collision plane to be walkable or not. So if it's not walkable, I'll show that. So if I have the collision plane on, or off, it's really there, it's just invisible, and drag let's see, a player pawn onto here, and then the collision plane is not walkable. Then you can't go anywhere because none of the tiles are walkable. Now this is a good way to make like a dungeon map or something like that. So if the collision plane is not walkable and we don't show the default tile like this, then you can place hexagonal tiles like this, and you can make like floating islands or dungeons or stuff like that, and that should work. Now we haven't changed like the walkability meshes yet, so they are still square. We'll have to fix that. So let's go back to the grid spawner here and find, let's see, the meshes. and we will replace those. See, tiles in move range, and let's see, where's the other one? Oh, there. And tiles in sight range, and we'll change some of these other meshes as well. The meshes for the hover marker. When you're hovering the mouse over a tile, it's better to have like this cut text tile perhaps. And for the current pawn, that's also a square, so I'll use the frame instead. There. Okay, so that looks better. So now we have this tiny little world. So yeah, that's one option. And then let's show the default tile again, or we just delete these tiles here. Go back to a bigger tile map. There. And we don't have to show this. Now this is practical as well. If you don't show the default tile and you don't show the collision plane, and you're going to place something on the map, well, it works with the grid snapping, but if you're placing something else, yeah, then it's not placed properly. So let's see. So if you show the collision plane, then you can place meshes directly on the grid. Okay, so that's that. And you have another option. This is pre-generate gameplay grids. Now there are some grids, or some arrays that are generated within the grid manager in the construction script. At the start, let's see. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. Now, inside the construction script, you can find the pre-generate gameplay grids function. Inside here, you can have the construction script pre-generate some of the arrays that are important for gameplay. So, for instance, the pawn array that designates what tiles are occupied by pawns, and the can move to array, which are movable. What are the edge costs of different nodes, stuff like that. So if you pre-generate this, that means that loading the game will be a bit quicker. So why not always have it set to true? Well, because that means that the construction script is slower, which means that if you resize the grid or move it around the world, stuff like that, it will be a bit slower. So while you're setting up the game, you can have it set to false, but before packaging at least you should set it to true. So that's what that means. Now for the next you have, let's see, cross corners. Yeah, that doesn't work with hexagonal grids because there aren't really any corners in the way that there are in square grids. So let's make this a square grid again. So I'll replace the mesh here with a square one, and I'll do the same for these as well. And I'll make it a proper square grid again. There. Yeah, so that works. And now, if we place a wall and we have cross corners set to false, as we have now, you can probably guess what happens. As you can see, he can't cross corners. Now, if it's set to true, then he can. Simple as that. And then you have another option. You have diagonal movement, which is currently set to true, which means that he can move diagonally. Well, if it is set to false, then he can't. So this is the movement you would have in games like, you know, Final Fantasy Tactics, stuff like that. So that's for you to decide. I like to have it set to true, like in XCOM. Okay, so the next one is a bit more complicated. This is auto-calculate costs based on height. This means that you can have different tiles of different height, and the grid automatically makes walkability depending on how high or low the different tiles are. So I'll set this to true. And then I'll place, you know, a regular square tile and put this a bit higher. So now this is, let's see, like 50 units above the ground, and this cutoff, let's say, is set to 100, which means that if the difference between this tile and the surrounding tiles is less than 100, then it will be walkable. So it should be, if we try now, he can walk on top of this. Yeah. And if we take another tile and we place this a bit higher, let's say, yeah, it's placed at 190, then we should not be able to walk on top of this, and we can't. Now let's make a stair like this. Okay, so let's see if that works. Yeah, so now he can walk on top of all three, but when he walks down again, he has to take all the steps because he can't walk down this edge. So that's how that works. Okay. Oh yeah, instantiate. That's a little thing I've added to make it possible to make large maps using actors. Now these tiles, the default tiles, they are instant static meshes. That means that all of them are drawn on screen with a single draw call, which is good for performance. So I can make large grids, and the impact on performance won't be that bad, even if they're pretty huge like this. If I did the same thing with regular static meshes, that would slow down the game immensely. So therefore I've made this option. If you're placing actors, you can turn their meshes into instant static meshes instead. So at the moment, if I placed loads of these, then it would have a heavy impact on performance. It doesn't now, of course, but I'll show how it works anyway. So if I mark all of them and I put them to, I toggle instantiate here, and then inside the grid manager I click instantiate. This means that all actors or all tiles which have instantiate set to true will be turned into instant static meshes. So when I click on these now, you can see that they are not separate actors anymore. They're all part of the instant or the grid manager. Now if I click it back again, then all instantiated meshes will turn back into the actors they used to be. So that's how that works. So that can be important for performance on very large maps. Now if you're just making smaller maps, this size, it wouldn't really matter at all. So you could just use regular actors for that. Okay, oh yeah, display path as spline. This is a legacy feature I kept just for something I made before. As you can see, oh yeah, since I've resized the map, he's confused as to what node he's standing on, so we have to just move him back and forth there. So you can see the path is displayed as a spline, and he's actually moving along this spline as he's moving. The rotation is based on the rotation of the spline. You can turn display path as spline to false, which will instead replace it with instant static meshes that you can set in the grid manager. So this is an option. This is slightly better for performance, and yeah, I mean, you might prefer this look. There's still a spline underneath here that designates how the pawn will move, but how it's displayed is different. So that's an option, if that's your thing. So those are the most important options. You have some options of changing like the average speed of pawns and stuff like that down here, and options for changing, you know, the height of the spline that is displayed. So for, yeah, so it can be, now it's quite far above the ground, as you can see. If you're using height maps and different heights of tiles that pawns are moving up and down on, you might want to have slightly higher spline for displaying movement, so that it doesn't clip through any of the tiles as the elevation is changing. So that's an option. Also, if you make a grid that is much smaller, for instance, if you're making like a tiny chessboard that's placed inside another level, stuff like that, you might want to have different heights for this spline. So yeah, you can change that, and the same for the tiles that are displayed around you. So now all these are hovering above the floor quite a bit. Yeah, so you have that option. useful sometimes. Same with the visibility tracing, which is the trace that decides whether you can see an enemy or not. So if I place like an enemy pawn here, and I increase my range to 50, why not? There. So you can see I can't see him, I can see all the other tiles. And because this blocks him, when I walk, let's see. Okay, you can attack me. But then you can see the height of this visibility trace. So if this block was lower, I could see him, you know, because the trace would be above them. So for these pawns, it's at head height, which I thought made sense. So you can change the height of that if you want. Okay. Yeah, these things from here and below you probably shouldn't touch. These are automatically generated. So yeah, I should probably put these in a folder. I'll do this in the next update. But yeah, you shouldn't modify any from instance array and below. Okay. So yeah, now that I'm talking about visibility, it could be a good time to show how you can set up some walls to be so that you can look past corners while others you can't. So let's find one of those. So we have tile wall block here, and we have this guy with ridiculous range. Let's give him ridiculous movement as well, why not? There. So for this tile, should not block visibility. So if I go here, you can see that you can look across the corner like this. Well, this tile does, so we cannot look past the corners, across the corners. So this is quite easy to set up. I mean, the tracing system for that's built into Unreal is really, it's really precise. So these are almost identical. If we go into their the actors, you can see here for the one that you can look across, the static mesh is set so that the scale in the X and Y direction is just below 1. That means that the traces will go across the corners. While in the case of the other blocks, it's set to be like just above 1. So they look identical, but this one blocks traces across the corners. So that's how you can set that up. Okay. So these things, yeah, I've told about how you can customize this. You can also customize the edge costs, which means I can change this one so it's possible to move inside from one of the corners. Yeah. So you can change these as you want. Also instantiate instance ID, or yeah, instantiate, but don't touch an instance ID and instance visibility or index. I should also put these in separate folders, so these are automatically generated. You can see as you move it around, the index is changing. So yeah, up here the first is index 0, index 1, 2, 3, 4, like this. So there are lots of indexes that represent, they are represented in quite a few arrays. So pawns have a few variables that can be changed as well. So they have ignored snap to custom grid, just like the tiles, and they have place actor at anchor, just like the tiles. You don't really need to touch this though, it's automatically set when you start the game, but yeah, you have the option. And then the move range, how many tiles does can a pawn move in one turn, and how far can it see. This can be pretty high numbers without it affecting performance much. I probably wouldn't put it as high as this though, but I mean, it depends on the hardware. Max health and current health, when it reaches 0, the pawn dies. Damage, how much damage does it deal to other pawns? I mean, these are very basic kind of attributes, and most games would have more stuff than this, but I tried to only include what is in almost all turn-based strategy games, and then you can add your own stuff on top of this. Though I am planning to include some templates for other kind of games, which will include like accuracy of range and stuff like that. At least if you people are interested in getting that, I'm going to add it later. So you can change the faction, enemy, or player, or empty means that it isn't registered as a pawn at all, it's just like a statue standing there. So if you set this to enemy, you can change this AI type. Melee means that it will look inside its move range before looking at its sight range when trying to find targets, and the other way around for ranged attacks. AI max search range, this is how far in pathfinding the AI will search before giving up. So this shouldn't be set to a really high number either, because it can cause performance issues, but it can be quite high. Launch projectile at range, this is a small thing I've included that lets pawns throw balls at each other when they are outside a certain range. So that's something, you probably wouldn't have that in a real game, but yeah, you can use that as a base for something else. The dynamic health bar material, that's the material of the health bar. You shouldn't change this. This is another variable I should probably hide away, but it has to be made public so that it can communicate with other blueprints. So yeah, that's the option, or the main options of variables for the grid and the pawns and tiles. So you can of course customize things much more if you go into the blueprints themselves. I'll do that a bit more in later videos, but for the next videos I'll first be showing how to change tiles to your own meshes, and how to change pawns to your own meshes, so you can make something that looks a bit more like a proper game. Okay, so that's it for now. Bye bye.